Okay, I get that I'm sleep deprived. I get it. But there is no reason why I should be on attempt number 4 here. But here we are. We are on attempt number 4. I'm so sorry, guys. I am a mess today, apparently. But that is okay. We will make it through. Alright, so before we start Book 5, Wolves of the Calla, let's recap. We started this journey out with Roland following the man in black across a desert. Since then, he's drawn his 3 companions. Jake has already died once, leaving us with a phrase that becomes really, really popular throughout the series. It's one of my favorite phrases, and that phrase is, "There are other worlds than these." It's actually a song titled that. I often wonder if the person who wrote that song is a fan of Stephen King. Anyway, beside the point. Since then, we have traveled through the world of The Stand. Before and after, Roland tells us the story of his one and only dead love and how she died. Horrific burning alive thing, you know. And what is really important about going through The Stand is really 2 things. We don't see or talk to Abigail, but Abigail is kind of the opposite of the man in black. And Roland says that it's a different story. It has nothing to do with their story. And he's kind of right about that and kind of not. It's just how all the worlds are connected in this universe. But what else is really, really important about dragging us through The Stand is we've gotten bits and pieces of information of who the man in black is through all these different books. So he starts out the man in black, and then Roland introduces the man in black as Martin Broadcloak, the court magician who seduces his mother. And then in Wizard and Glass, when we're going through, we find out 2 things. In his flashbacks, we find out that the man in black is also referred to, when he's telling the story of Susan, the man in black is also referred to as John Farson, or the good man. In The Stand, he goes by the name Randall Flagg. So if any of you have watched The Stand, read The Stand, you should know who Randall Flagg is. He is the, in The Stand, he's the big bad guy. In the universe, he's not the big bad guy at all. But he is the one that comes across as a demon and impregnates that girl. That is Randall Flagg. So now we know the man in black is Randall Flagg, John Farson, the good man, Martin Broadcloak. All of those. Okay. So the first part of Wolves of the Calla is called Resistance. And the prologue is called Ruined. We all know how Stephen King loves his sections. And so this section of the book is called 19, just the number 19. Before we start reading, I would like to remind you all that if somebody else is live right now, particularly somebody that you enjoy, please, please, please go watch them, support them, go interact in their chat, all of that stuff. This will be here later. I only do it live because I am too lazy to record. So, on that note, please forgive the background noises, the dogs, the cars, any people who may randomly show up at my house like they did before I started this. So, 1 second. I am going to get a drink of water and take a hit because I can. And I will be right back with you, and we will begin reading. Hey Ghost, welcome. This is not my live. My live will either be this evening or tomorrow, but this is just the reading. But hello, I hope you are doing well. It is good to see you stop by. Alright, the prologue is called Roont. R-O-O-N-T. Tian was blessed, though few farmers would have used such a word, with 3 patches. River Field, where his family had grown rice since time out of mind, Roadside Field, where Ca Jaffords had grown sharp-root pumpkin and corn for those same long years and generations, and Son of a Bitch, a thankless tract, which mostly grew rocks, blisters, and busted hopes. Tian wasn't the first Jaffords determined to make something of the 20 acres behind the home place. His grandpere, perfectly sane in most other respects, had been convinced there was gold there. Tian's ma had been equally positive it would grow porin, a spice of great worth. Tian's particular insanity was madrigal. Of course madrigal would grow in Son of a Bitch. Must grow there. He'd gotten hold of 1,000 seeds, and a dear penny they had cost him, that were now hidden beneath the floorboards of his bedroom. All that remained before planting next year was to break ground in Son of a Bitch. This chore was easier spoken of than accomplished. Clan Jaffords was blessed with livestock, including 3 mules, but a man would be mad to try using a mule out in Son of a Bitch. The beast, unlucky enough to draw such duty, would likely be... 2 pages stuck together. Would likely be lying leg broke or stung to death by noon of the first day. One of Tian's uncles had almost met his latter fate some years before. He had come running back to the home place, screaming at the top of his lungs and pursued by huge muley wasps with stingers the size of nails. They had found the nest. Well, Andy had found it. Andy wasn't bothered by wasps, no matter how big they were, and burned it with kerosene. But there might be others. And there were holes. You're a bugger, plenty of them, and you couldn't burn holes, could you? No. Son of a Bitch sat on what the old folks called loose ground. It was consequently possessed of almost as many holes as rocks, not to mention at least one cave that puffed out draughts of nasty, decay-smelling air. Who knew what boggarts and speakies might lurk down its dark throat? And the worst holes weren't out to where a man or a mule could see them. Not at all, sir. Never think so. The leg breakers were always concealed in innocent-seeming nestles of weeds and high grass. Your mule would step in, there would come a bitter crack like a snapping branch, and then the damn thing would be lying there on the ground, teeth bared, eyes rolling, braying its agony at the sky until you put it out of its misery, that was. And stock was valuable in Calla Bryn Sturges, even stock that wasn't precisely threaded. Tian, therefore, plowed with his sister in the traces. No reason not to. Tia was Roont, hence good for little else. She was a big girl. The Roont ones often grew to a prodigious size, and she was willing. Man Jesus love her. The old fella had made her a Jesus tree, what he called a crucifix, and she wore it everywhere. It swung back and forth now, thumping against her sweating skin as she pulled. The plow was attached to her shoulder by a rawhide harness. Behind her, alternately guiding the plow by its old ironwood handles and his sister by the by the hame traces. Tian grunted and yanked and pushed when the blade of the plow dropped down and verged on becoming stuck. It was the end of full earth, but as hot as midsummer here in son of a bitch. Tia's overalls were dark and damp and stuck to her long and meaty thighs. Each time Tian tossed his head to get his hair out of his eyes, the sweat flew out of the mop in a spray. "Gee, you bitch," he cried. "You rocks the plow breaker, are you blind?" "Not blind, not deaf either, just ruined." She heaved to the left and hard. Behind her, Tian stumbled forward with a neck-snapping jerk and barked his shin on another rock, one he hadn't seen, and the plow had, for a wonder, missed. As he felt the first warm trickles of blood running down to his ankle, he wondered, and not for the first time, what madness it was that always got the Jaffordses out here. In his deepest heart, he had an idea that Madrigal would sow no more than the poorin had before it. Although he could grow devil grass, he could have bloomed all 20 acres with that shit had he wanted. The trick was to keep it out. And it was always New Earth's first chore. The plow rocked to the right and then jerked forward, almost pulling his arms out of their sockets. "Arr!" he cried. "Go easy, girl. I can't grow 'em back if you pull 'em out, can I?" Tia turned her broad, sweaty, empty face up to a sky full of low-hanging clouds and honked laughter. Man, Jesus, but she even sounded like a donkey. Yet it was laughter, human laughter. Tian wondered, as he sometimes couldn't help doing, if that laughter meant anything. Did she understand some of what he was saying, or did she only respond to his tone of voice? Did any of the ruined ones? "Good day, Sai," said a loud, almost completely toneless voice from behind him. The owner of the voice ignored Tian's scream of surprise. "Pleasant days, and may they be long upon the earth. I am from a goodish wonder, and at your service." Tian whirled around, saw Andy standing there, all 7 feet of him, and was then almost jerked flat as his sister took another of her large, lurching steps forward. The plow's hame traces were pulled from his hands and flew around his throat with an audible snap. Tia, unaware of this potential disaster, took another sturdy step forward. When she did, Tian's wind was cut off. He gave a whooping, gagging gasp and clawed at the straps. All of this Andy watched with his usual large and meaningless smile. Tia jerked forward again, and Tian was pulled off his feet. He landed on a rock that dug savagely at the cleft of his buttocks, but at least he could breathe again, for the moment anyway. Damned unlucky field, always had been, always would be. Tian snatched hold of the leather strap before it could pull tight around his throat again and yelled, "Hold ye, bitch! Whoa up if you don't want me to twist your great and useless tits right off the front of your—" Tia halted agreeably enough and looked back to see what was what. Her smile broadened. She lifted one heavily muscled arm. It glowed with sweat and pointed. "Andy," she said. "Andy's come." "I ain't blind," Tian said and got to his feet, rubbing his bottom. Was that part of him also bleeding? Good man Jesus, he had an idea it was. "Good day, Sai," Andy said to her and tapped his metal throat 3 times with his 3 metal fingers. "Long days and pleasant nights." Although Tia had surely heard the standard response to this, and may you have twice the number, 1,000 times or more, all she could do was once more raise her broad idiot's face to the sky and honk her donkey laugh. Tian felt a surprising moment of pain, not in his arms or throat or outraged ass, but in his heart. He vaguely remembered her as a little girl, as pretty and quick as a dragonfly, as smart as ever you could wish. Then... But before he could finish the thought, a premonition came. He felt a sinking in his heart. The news would come while I'm out here, he thought, out in this godforsaken patch where nothing is well and all luck is bad. It was time, wasn't it? Overtime. "Andy," he said. "Yes," Andy said, smiling. "Andy, your friend, back from a goodish wander and at your service. Would you like your horoscope, Tian? It is full earth. The moon is red, what is called the huntress moon in midworld, that is. A friend will call. Business affairs prosper. You will have 2 ideas, one good and one bad." The bad one was coming out here to turn this field, Tian said. Never mind my goddamn horoscope, Andy. Why are you here? Andy smiled. Probably could not become troubled. He was a robot, after all. The last one in the Calla burned sturges, or for miles and wheels around, but to Tian it seemed to grow troubled just the same. The robot looked like a young child's stick figure of an adult, impossibly tall and impossibly thin. His legs and arms were silvery. His head was stainless steel barrel with electric eyes. His body, no more than a cylinder, was gold, stamped in the middle. What would have been a man's chest was this legend: North Central Positronics Ltd., in association with Lamerck Industries, presents Andy, Design Messenger, many other functions. Serial number DNF-44821-B-63. Why or how this silly thing had survived when all the rest of the robots were gone for generations, Tian neither knew nor cared. You were apt to see him anywhere in the Calla. He would not venture beyond its borders, striding on his impossibly thin silver legs, looking everywhere, occasionally clicking to himself as he stored, or perhaps purged, who knew, information. He sang songs, passed on gossip and rumor from one end of town to the other. A tireless walker was Andy the messenger robot, and seemed to enjoy the giving of horoscopes above all things, although there was general agreement in the village that they meant little. He had one other function, however, and that meant much. Why are you here, you bag of old bolts and beams? Answer me, is it the wolves? Are they coming from Thunderclap? Tian stood there, looking up into Andy's stupid smiling metal face, the sweat growing cold on his skin, praying with all his might that the foolish thing would say no, then offer to tell his horoscope again, or perhaps to sing the Green Corn Adeo, all 20 or 30 verses. But all Andy said, still smiling, was, "Yes, Sai." "Christ and the man Jesus," Tian said. He'd got an idea from the old fella that those were two names for the same thing, but had never bothered pursuing the question. "How long?" "1 moon of days before they arrive," Andy replied, still smiling. "From full to full?" "Close enough, Sai." 30 days then, give or take one. 30 days to the wolves. And there was no sense hoping Andy was wrong. No one kenned how the robot could know they were coming out of the thunderclap so far in advance of their arrival, but he did know, and he was never wrong. "Fuck you for your bad news," Tian cried, and was furious at the waver he heard in his own voice. "What use are you?" "I'm sorry that the news is bad," Andy said. His voice guts clicked audibly. His eyes flashed a brighter blue, and he took a step backward. "Would you not like me to tell your horoscope? This is the end of full earth, a time particularly propitious for finishing old business and meeting new people." "And fuck your false prophecy, too." Tian bent, picked up a clod of earth, and threw it at the robot. A pebble, buried in the clod, clanged off Andy's metal hide. Tia gasped, then began to cry. Andy backed off another step, his shadow trailing out long in son-of-a-bitch field, but its hateful, stupid smile remained. "What about a song? I have learned an amusing one from the Manny, far north of town. It is called, 'In Time of Loss, Make God Your Boss.'" From somewhere deep in Andy's guts came the wavering honk of a pitch pipe, followed by a ripple of piano keys. It goes, sweat rolling down his cheeks and sticking his itchy balls to his thighs, the stink smell of his own foolish obsession, Tia blathering her stupid face at the sky, and this idiotic, bad news-bearing robot getting ready to sing him some sort of manny hymn. "Be quiet, Andy." He spoke reasonably enough, but through clamped teeth. "Sigh," the robot agreed, then fell mercifully silent. Tian went to his bawling sister, put his arm around her, smelled the large, but not entirely unpleasant, smell of her. No obsession there, just the smell of work and obedience. He sighed, then began to stroke her trembling arm. "Quit it, you great bawling cunt," he said. The words might have been ugly, but the tone was kind. In the extreme, and it was the tone she responded to. She began to quiet. Her brother stood with the flare of her hip pushing into him just below his rib cage. She was a full foot taller, and any passing stranger would likely have stopped to look at them, amazed by the similarity of face and the great dissimilarity of size. The resemblance, at least, was honestly come by. They were twins. He soothed his sister with a mixture of endearments and profanities. In the years since she had come back ruined from the East, the two modes of expression were much the same to T and Jaffords, and at last she ceased her weeping. And when a rusty flew across the sky, doing loops and giving out the usual series of ugly blats, she pointed and laughed. A feeling was rising in Tian, one so foreign to his nature that he didn't even recognize it. "Isn't right," he said. "No, sir. By the man Jesus and all the gods that be, it isn't." He looked to the east, where the hills rolled away into a rising membranous darkness that might have been clouds, but wasn't. It was the edge of thunderclap. "Isn't right what they do to us?" Sure you wouldn't like to hear your horoscope, sigh? I see bright coins and a beautiful dark lady." "The dark ladies will have to do without me," Tian said, and began pulling the harness off his sister's broad shoulders. "I'm married, as I'm sure ye very well know." "Many a married man has had his Jilly," Andy observed. To Tian, he sounded almost smug. "Not those who love their wives." Tian shouldered the harness. He'd made it himself, there being a marked shortage of track for human beings in most livery barns, and turned toward the home place. "And not for farmers in any case. Show me a farmer who can afford a Jilly, and I'll kiss your shinny ass. Garn. Garn, Tia. Lift 'em up and put 'em down." "Home place?" she asked. "That's right." "Lunch at home place?" She looked at him in a muddled, hopeful way. "Taters?" A pause. "Gravy?" "Sure," Tian said. "Why the hell not?" Tia let out a whoop and began running toward the house. There was something almost awe-inspiring about her when she ran. As their father had once observed, not long before the fall that carried him off, bright or dim, that's a lot of meat in motion. Tian walked slowly after her, head down, watching for the holes which his sister seemed to avoid without even looking, as if some deep part of her had mapped the location of each one. The strange new feeling kept growing and growing. He knew about anger. Any farmer who'd ever lost cow to the milk sick or watched a summer hailstorm beat his corn flat knew plenty about that. But this was deeper. This was rage, and it was a new thing. He walked slowly, head down, fists clenched. He wasn't aware of Andy following along behind him until the robot said, There's other news, Sai. Northwest of town, along the path of the beam. Strangers from Outworld." "Bugger the beam, bugger the strangers, and bugger your good self," Tian said. "Let me be, Andy." Andy stood where he was for a moment, surrounded by the rocks and weeds and useless knobs of son of a bitch, that thankless tract of Jaffords land. Relays inside him clicked, his eyes flashed, and he decided to go and talk to the old fella. The old fella never told him to bugger his good self. The old fella was always willing to hear his horoscope, and he was always interested in strangers. Andy started toward town and Our Lady of Serenity. 2. Zalia Jaffords didn't see her husband and sister-in-law come back from son of a bitch, didn't hear Tia plunging her head repeatedly into the rain barrel outside the barn and then blowing moisture off her lips like a horse. Zalia was on the south side of the house, hanging out wash and keeping an eye on the children. She wasn't aware that Tian was back until she saw him looking out the kitchen window at her. She was surprised to see him there at all, and much more than surprised by the look of him. His face was ashy pale except for 2 bright blots of color high up on his cheeks, and a third glaring in the center of his forehead like a brand. She dropped the few pins she was still holding back into her clothes basket and started for the house. "We're going, Ma," Hedden called out. "We're going, Mama," Hedda echoed. "Never mind," she said. Just keep an eye on your kabobbies." "Why?" Hedda whined. She had that whine down to a science. One of these days, she would draw it out a little too long, and her mother would clout her right down dead. "Because you're the oldest," she said. "But—" "Shut your mouth, Hedda Jaffords." "We'll watch 'em, Ma," Hedden said. Always agreeable was her Hedden. Probably not quite so bright as his sister, but bright wasn't everything. Far from it. Want us to finish hanging the wash?" "Hedden," from his sister, that irritating whine again. But Thalia had no time for them. She just took one glance at the others. Lyman and Leah who were 5, and Aaron, who was 2. Aaron sat naked in the dirt, happily clunking 2 stones together. He was the rare singleton, and how the women of the village envied her on account of him, because Aaron would always be safe. The others, however, Hedden and Hedda, Lyman and Leah, she supposed she suddenly understood what it might mean, him back at the house in the middle of the day like this. She prayed to the gods it wasn't so, but when she came into the kitchen and saw the way he was looking out at the kiddies, she became almost sure it was. "Tell me it isn't the wolves," she said in a dry, frantic voice. "Say it ain't." "'Tis," Tian replied. 30 days, Andy says, moon to moon. And on that, Andy's never... Before he could go on, Thalia Jeffords clapped her hands to her temples and shrieked. In the side yard, Hedda jumped up. In another moment, she would have been running for the house, but Hedden held her back. "They won't take any as young as Lyman and Leah, will they?" she asked. "Hedda or Hedden? Maybe, but surely not my little ones. Why, they won't see their 6th for another half-year." "The wolves have taken 'em as young as 3, and you know it," Tian said. His hands opened and closed, opened and closed. That feeling inside him continued to grow, the feeling that was deeper than mere anger. She looked at him, tears spilling down her face. "Mayhap it's time to say no." Tian spoke in a voice he hardly recognized as his own. "How can we?" she whispered. "How in the name of the gods can we?" "Dunno," he said. "But come here, woman, I beg ya." She came, throwing one last glance over her shoulder at the 5 children in the backyard, as if to make sure they were still all there, that no wolves had taken them yet, and then crossed the living room. Grandpere sat in the corner chair by the dead fire, head bent over, dozing and drizzling from his folded, toothless mouth. From this room, the barn was visible. Tian drew his wife to the window and pointed. "There," he said. "Do you mark 'em, woman? Do you see 'em very well?" Of course she did. Tian's sister, 6.5 feet tall, now standing with the straps of her overalls lowered, and her big breasts sparkling with water as she splashed them from the rain barrel. Standing in the barn doorway was Zalman, Zalia's very own brother. Almost 7 feet tall was he, big as Lord Perth, tall as Andy, and as empty face as the girl. A strapping young man watching a strapping young woman with her breasts out on show like that might well have been sporting a bulge in his pants. But there was none in Zally's, nor ever would be. He was ruined. She turned back to Tian. They looked at each other, a man and a woman, not ruined, but only because of dumb luck. So far as either of them knew, it could just as easily have been Zal and Tia standing in here and watching Tian and Zalia out by the barn, grown large of body and empty of head. "Of course I see," she told him. "Does he think I'm blind?" "Don't it sometimes make you wish you was?" he asked, "to see him so?" Zalia made no reply. "Not right, woman. Not right. Never has been. But since time out of mind, bugger time out of mind too," Tian cried. "They's children. Our children." "Would you have the wolves burn the Calla to the ground then? Leave us all with our throats cut and our eyes fried and our heads? For it's happened before. You know it has." He knew all right. But who would put matters right if not the men of Calla Bryn Sturgis? Certainly there were no authorities, not so much as a sheriff either high or low in these parts. They were on their own. Even long ago, when the inner baronies had glowed with light and order, they would have seen precious little sign of that bright life out here. These were the borderlands, and life here had always been strange. Then the wolves had began coming, and life had grown far stranger. How long ago had it begun? How many generations? Tien didn't know, but he thought time out of mind was too long. The wolves had been raiding into the borderland villages when Grandpere was young, certainly. Grandpere's own twin had been snatched as the two of them sat in the dust playing at jacks. They took him 'cause he closer than they rud, Grandpere had told them many times. If I come out the house first that day, I be closer to the rud, and they take me. God is good. Then he would kiss the wooden cruci the old fellow had given him, hold it skyward, and cackle. Your Grandpere's own Grandpere had told them that in his day, which had been 5 or perhaps even 6 generations back, if Tien's calculations were right, there had been no wolves sweeping out of Thunderclap on their gray horses. Once Tien had asked the old man, and did all but a few of the babies come in twos back then? Did any of the old folks ever say? Grandpere had considered this long, then had shaken his head. No, he couldn't remember what the old-timers had ever said about that, one way or the other. Calla was looking at him anxiously. You're in no mood to think of such things, I wot, after spending your mornings in that rocky patch. My frame of mind won't change when they come or who'll they'll take, Tien said. You'll not do something foolish, T, will you? Something foolish and all on your own? No, he said. No hesitation. He's already begun to lay plans, she thought, and allowed herself a thin gleam of hope. Surely there was nothing Tien could do against the wolves, nothing any of them could do. But he was far from stupid. In a farming village where most men could think no further than planting next row, or planting their stiffies on Saturday night, Tien was something of an anomaly. He could write his name, he could write words that said, I love you, Sally, and had won her by doing so, even though she couldn't read them there in the dirt. He could add the numbers and also call them back from big to small, which he said was even more difficult. Was it possible? Part of her didn't want to complete that thought, and yet when she turned her mother's heart and mind to Hedda and Hedden, Leah and Lyman, part of her wanted to hope. What then? I'm going to call a town gathering. I'll send the feather. Will they come? When they hear their news, every man in the Calla will turn up. We'll talk it over. Mayhap they'll want to fight this time. Mayhap they'll want to fight for their babies. From behind them, a cracked old voice said, Ye foolish kin. Tia and Calla turned hand in hand to look at the old man. Killin was a harsh word, but Tien judged the old man was looking at him, kindly enough. Why'd you say so, Grandpere? He asked. Men'd go from such a meetin' as ye plan on and burn down half the countryside. Where they drink, the old man said. Men sober. He shook his head. You'll never move such. I think this time you might be wrong, Grandpere, Tien said, and Calla felt cold terror squeeze her heart, and yet buried in it warm was that hope. There would have been less grumbling if he'd given them at least one night's notice, but Tien wouldn't do that. They didn't have the luxury of even a single fallow night, and when he sent Hedden and Hedda with the feather, they did come. He'd known they would. The Kaya's gathering hall stood at the end of the village high street, beyond Took's general store and Catter corner from the town pavilion, which was now dusty and dark with the end of summer. Soon enough the ladies of the town would begin decorating it for reap, but they'd never made a lot of reaping night in the Calla. The children always enjoyed seeing the stuffy guys thrown on the fire, of course, and the bolder fellas would steal their share of kisses as the night itself approached, but that was about it. Your frippies and festivities might do for mid-world and in-world, but this was neither. Out here they had more serious things to worry about than reaping day fairs. Things like the wolves. Some of the men, from the well-to-do farms to the west and 3 ranches to the south, come on horses. Eisenhart of the Rocking Bee even brought his rifle and wore criss-crossed ammunition bandoliers. T and Jaffords doubted if the bullets were any good, or that the ancient rifle would fire even if some of them were. A delegation of the Manny-folk came crammed into a bucka drawn by a pair of muty geldings, one with 3 eyes, the other with a pylon of raw pink flesh poking out of its back. Most of the Calla men came on donks and burros, dressed in their white pants and long, colorful shirts. They knocked their dusty sombreros back on the tug strings with calloused thumbs as they stepped into the gathering hall, looking uneasily at each other. The benches were of plain pine, with no womenfolk and none of the ruined ones. The men filled fewer than 30 of the 90 benches. There was some talk, but no laughter at all. Tian stood out front with the feather now in his hands, watching the sun as it sank toward the horizon, its gold steadily deepening to a color that was like infected blood. When it touched the land, he took one more look up on High Street. It was empty except for 3 or 4 ruined fellas sitting on the steps, tooks, all of them huge and good for nothing more than yanking rocks out of the ground. He saw no more men, no more approaching donkeys. He took a deep breath, let it out, then drew in another, and looked up at the deepening sky. And one moment, I'm so sorry I have to answer this call. Hello? Hey. I'm sorry, do what? Okay, I will... Okay, I'm sorry about that. Where were we? He took a deep breath, let it out, and then drew in another and looked up at the deepening sky. Man, Jesus, I don't believe in you, he said. But if you're up there, help me now. And tell God thank ye. Then he went inside and closed the gathering hall doors a little harder than was strictly necessary. The talk stopped. 140 men, most of them farmers, watched him walk to the front of the hall, the wide legs of his white pants swishing, his shore boots clacking on the hardwood floor. He had expected to be terrified by this point, perhaps even to find himself speechless. He was a farmer, not a stage performer or a politician. Then he thought of his children, and when he looked up at the men, he found he had no trouble meeting their eyes. The feather in his hand did not tremble. When he spoke, his words followed each other easily, naturally, and coherently. They might not do as he hoped they would. Grandpere might be right about that, but they looked willing enough to listen. You all know who I am, he said as he stood there with his hands clasped around the reddish feather's ancient stalk. Tian Jaffords, son of Luke, husband of Zalia Hunik, that was. She and I have 5, 2 pairs and a singleton. Low murmurs at that, most probably having to do with how lucky Tian and Zalia were to have their Aaron. Tian waited for the voices to die away. I've lived in the Calla all my life. I've shared your kef and you've shared mine. Now hear what I say, I beg. We say thank ye, Sai, they murmured. It was little more than a stock response, yet Tian was encouraged. The wolves are coming, he said. I have this news from Andy. 30 days from moon to moon, and then they're here. More low murmurs. Tian heard dismay and outrage, but no surprise. When it came to spreading news, Andy was extremely efficient. Even those of us who can read and write a little have almost no paper to write on, Tian said, so I cannot tell ye with any real certainty when last they came. There are no records, ye ken. Just one mouth to another. I know I was well breeched, so it's longer than 20 years. It's 24, said a voice in the back of the room. Nay, 23, said a voice closer to the front. Reuben Cavera stood up. He was a plump man with a round, cheerful face. The cheer was gone from it now, however, and it showed only distress. They took Ruth, my sissa, hear me, I beg." A murmur, really no more than a vocalized sigh of agreement, came from the men sitting crammed together on the benches. They could have spread out, but had chosen shoulder to shoulder instead. Sometimes there was a comfort in discomfort, Tian reckoned. Reuben said, "We were playing under the big pine in the front yard when they came. I made a mark on that tree each year after. Even after they brung her back, I went on with them. It was 23 marks and 23 years. With that, he sat down. 23 or 24 makes no difference, Tian said. Those were kiddies when the wolves came last. Those who were kiddies when the wolves came last time have grown up since and had kiddies of their own. There's a fine crop out here for those bastards, a fine crop of children." He paused, giving them a chance to think of the next idea for themselves before speaking it aloud. "If we let it happen," he said at last. "If we let the wolves take our children into Thunderclap and then send them back to us ruined." "What the hell else can we do?" cried a man sitting on one of the middle benches. "They's not human." At this, there was a general and miserable mumble of agreement. One of the Mannies stood up, pulling his dark blue cloak tight against his bony shoulders. He looked around at the others with baleful eyes. They weren't mad, those eyes, but to Tian, they looked a long league from reasonable. "Hear me, I beg," he said. "We thank ye, Sai," respectful but reserved. To see a Mannie in town was a rare thing, and here were 8, all in a bunch. Tian was delighted they had come. If anything would underline the deadly seriousness of this business, the appearance of the Mannie would do that. The gathering hall door opened, and one more man slipped inside. He wore a long black cloak. There was a scar on his forehead. None of the men, including Tian, noticed. They were watching the Mannie. Hear what the Book of Mannie says. When the angel of death passes over Ajib, he killed the firstborn in every house where the blood of a sacrificial lamb hadn't been daubed on the doorposts. So says the book. Praise the book, said the rest of the Mannie. Perhaps we should do likewise, the Mannie spokesperson went on. His voice was calm, but a pulse beat wildly in his forehead. Perhaps we should turn these next 30 days into a festival of joy for the wee ones, and then put them to sleep and let their blood out upon the earth. Let the wolves take their corpses into the east, should they desire. You're insane, Bernito Cash said, indignant and at the same time almost laughing. You and all your kind. We ain't gonna kill our babbies. Would the ones that come back not be better off dead? The Mannie responded. Great useless hulks. Scooped out shells. Aye, and what about their brothers and sisters? Asked von Eisenhart. For the wolves only take one out of every 2, as ye very well know. The second Mannie rose. This one, with a silky white beard flowing down over his breast. The first one sat down. The old man, Henchik, looked around at the others, then at Tian. You hold the feather, young fella. May I speak? Tian nodded for him to go ahead. This wasn't a bad start at all. Let them fully explore the box they were in, explore it all the way to the corners. He was confident they'd see there were only 2 alternatives in the end. Let the wolves take one of every pair under the age of puberty as they always had, or stand and fight. But to see that, they needed to understand that all other ways out were dead ends. The old man spoke patiently, sorrowfully even. 'Tis a terrible idea, aye. But think ye this, sighs. If the wolves were to come and find us childless, they might leave us alone ever after. Aye, so they might, one of the smallhold farmers rumbled. His name was Jorge Estrada. And so they might not, Mannie sighed. Would you really kill a whole town's children for what might be? A strong rumble of agreement ran through the crowd. Another smallholder, Garrett Strong, rose to his feet. His pug dog's face was translucent. His thumbs were hung in his belt. Better we all kill ourselves, he said, babbies and grown-ups alike. The Mannie didn't look outraged at this, nor did any of the other bluecoats around him. It's an option, the old man said. We would speak of it if others would. He sat down. Not me, Garrett Strong said. I'd be like cutting off your own damn head to save shaving. Hear me? Hear me, I beg." There was laughter and a few cries of, "Hear you very well." Garrett sat back down, looking a little less tense, and put his head together with Von Eisenhart. One of the other ranchers, Diego Adams, was listening in, his black eyes intent. Another smallholder rose, Bucky Javier. He had a bright little blue eyes and a small head that seemed to slope back from his goateed chin. "What if we left for a while?" he asked. "What if we took our children and went back west, all the way to the west branch of the big river, mayhap?" There was a moment of considering silence at this bold idea. The west branch of the Y was almost all the way back to Midworld, where, according to Andy, a great palace of green glass had lately appeared and even more lately disappeared again. Tian was about to respond himself when Eben Took, the storekeeper, did it for him. Tian was relieved. He hoped to be silent as long as possible. When they were talked out, he'd tell them what was left. "Are you mad?" Eben asked. "Wolves would come in, see us gone, and burn all to the ground, farms and ranches, crops and stores, root and branch. What would we come back to?" "And what if they came after us?" Jorge Estrada chimed in. "Do you think we'd be hard to follow, for such as the wolves? They'd burn us out, as Took says, ride our back trail and take the kiddies anyway." Louder agreement, the stomp of shore boots on the plain pine floorboards, and a few cries of, "Hear him! Hear him!" "Besides," Neil Faraday said, standing and holding his vast and filthy sombrero in front of him, "they never steal all our children." He spoke in a frightened, let's-be-reasonable tone that set Tian's teeth on edge. It was this counsel he feared above all others, its deadly false call to reason. One of the Manny, this one younger and beardless, uttered a sharp and contemptuous laugh. "Oh, one saved out of every two, and that make it all right, does it? God bless thee." He might have said more, but Henchik clamped a gnarled hand on the young man's arm. The young one said no more, but he didn't lower his head submissively either. His eyes were hot, his lips a thin white line. "I don't mean it's right," Neil said. He had begun to spin his sombrero in a way that made Tian feel a little dizzy. "But we have to face the realities, don't we? Aye, and they don't take them all. When my daughter, Georgina, she's just as apt and canny. Yar, and your son George is a great empty-headed galoot," Ben Slightman said. Slightman was Eisenhart's foreman, and he did not suffer fools lightly. He took off his spectacles, wiped them with the bandana, and set them back on his face. "I seen him settin' on the steps in front of Tookie's when I rode down street. Seen him very well, him and some others equally empty-brained. But—" "I know," Slightman said. "It's a hard decision. Some empty brains might be better than all dead." He paused. "Or all taken, instead of just half." Cries of "Hear him and say thankies." Ben Slightman sat down. "They always leave us enough to go on with, don't they?" asked a small-hold farmer whose place was just west of Tian's near the edge of the Calla. His name was Louis Haycox, and he spoke in a musing, bitter tone of voice. Below his mustache, his lips curved in a smile that didn't have much humor in it. "We won't kill our children," he said, looking at the Manny. "All God's grace to ye, gentlemen, but I don't believe even you could do so. Came it right down to the killin' floor. Or not all of ye. We can't pull up bag and baggage and go west or in any other direction because we leave our farms behind. They'd burn us out, all right, and come after the children just the same. They need 'em. Gods know why. It always comes back to the same thing. We're farmers, most of us, strong when our hands are in the soil, weak when they ain't. I got 2 kiddies of my own, 4-year-olds, and I love 'em both well. Should hate to lose either, but I'd give one up to keep the other, and my farm." Murmurs of agreement met this. "What other choice do we have?" "I say this, it would be the world's worst mistake to anger the wolves. Unless, of course, we can stand against them. If it were possible, I'd stand. But I just don't see how it is." Tian felt his heart shrivel with each of Haycock's words. How much of his thunder had the man stolen, God's and the man Jesus? Wayne Overholser got to his feet. He was Calla Bryn Sturge's most successful farmer, and had a vast sloping belly to prove it. "Hear me, I beg." "We say thank ye, Si," they murmured. "Tell you what we're going to do," he said, looking around. "What we've always done, that's what. Do any of you want to talk about standing against the wolves? Any of you that mad? With what? Spears and rocks, a few bows and bars? Maybe 4 rusty old Sov calibers like that." He jerked a thumb toward Eisenhardt's rifle. "Don't be making fun of my shooting iron, son," Eisenhardt said. But he was smiling ruefully. "They'll come and they'll take the children," Overholser said, looking around. "Some of them. Then they'll leave us alone again for a generation, or even longer. So it is, so it has been, and I say, leave it alone." Disapproving rumbles rose at this, but Overholser waited them out. 23 or 24, it doesn't matter," he said when they were quiet again. "Either way, it's a long time of peace. Could be you've forgotten a few things, folks. One is that children are like any other crop. God always sends more. I know that sounds hard, but it's how we've lived, and how we have to go on." Tian didn't wait for any of the stock responses. If they went any further down this road, any chance he might have to turn them would be lost. He raised the Apophanax feather and said, "Hear what I say. Would ye hear, I beg?" "Thank ye, Si," they responded. Overholser was looking at Tian distrustfully. "And you're right to look at me so," the farmer thought, "for I've had enough of such cowardly common sense, so I have." "Wayne Overholser is a smart man and a successful man," Tian said, "and I hate to speak against his position for those reasons, and for another as well. He's old enough to be my da." "Why, he ain't your da," Garrett Strong's only farmhand, Rossiter, his name was called out, and there was general laughter. Even Overholser smiled at the jest. "Son, if you truly hate to speak agin me, don't you do it," Overholser said. He continued to smile, but only with his mouth. "I must, though," Tian said. He began to walk slowly back and forth in front of the benches. In his hands the rusty red plume of the Apophanax feather swayed. Tian raised his voice slightly so they'd understand he was no longer speaking just to the big farmer. "I must, because Si Overholser is old enough to be my da. His children are grown, do ye ken it? And so far as I know, there are only 2 to begin with. There were only 2 to begin with, 1 girl and 1 boy. He paused, then shot the killer. "Born 2 years apart. Both singletons, in other words. Both safe from the wolves." Although he didn't need to say it right out loud, the crowd murmured. Overholser flushed a bright and dangerous red. "That's a rotten goddamn thing to say. My get's got nothin' to do with whether single or double. Give me that feather, Jaffords. I got a few more things to say." But the boots began to thump down on the boards, slowly at first, then picking up speed until they rattled like hail. Overholser looked around angrily, now so red he was nearly purple. "I'd speak," he shouted. "Would ye not hear me, I beg?" Cries of "No, no," and "Not now," and "Jaffords has the feather," and "Sit and listen," came in response. Tian had an idea Si Overholser was learning, and remarkably late in the game. There was often deep-running resentments of villages' richest and most successful. Those less fortunate, or less canny, most of the time, they amounted to the same, might tug their hats off when the rich folks passed in their buckas and low croches. They might send a slaughtered pig or a cow as a thank you, and the rich folk loaned their hired hands to help with the house or barn raising. The well-to-do might be cheered at year-end gatherings for helping to buy the piano that now sat in the pavilion's musica. Yet the men of the Calla tromped their shore boots to drown Overholser out with a certain savage satisfaction. Overholser, unused to being balked in such a way, flabbergasted in fact, tried one more time. "I'd have the feather. Do ye, I beg?" "No," Tian said. "Later if it does you, but not now." There were actual cheers at this, mostly from the smallest of the smallhold farmers and some of their hands. The Manny did not join in. They were now drawn so tightly together that they looked like a dark blue ink stain in the middle of the hall. They were clearly bewildered by this turn. Von Eisenhardt and Diego Adams, meanwhile, moved to flank Overholser and speak low to him. "You've got a chance," Tien thought. "Better make the most of it." He raised the feather, and they quieted. "Everyone will have a chance to speak," he said. "As for me, I say this. We can go on this way, simply bowing our heads and standing quiet when the wolves come and take our children. They always return them," a hand named Farron Pasea said timidly. "They return husks," Tien cried, and there were a few cries of "hear him." "Not enough, however," Tien judged. "Not enough by far. Not yet." He lowered his voice again. He did not want to harangue them. Overholser had tried that and gotten nowhere, 1,000 acres or not. "They return husks. And what of us? What is this doing to us? Some might say nothing, that the wolves have always been part of our life in Calla Bryn Sturgis, like the occasional cyclone or earthshake. Yet that is not true. They've been coming for 6 generations at most, but the Calla's been here 1,000 years or more." The old manny with the bony shoulders and baleful eyes half rose. "He says true, Fulkin. There were farmers here and manny folk among them when the darkness and the thunderclap hadn't yet come, let alone the wolves." They received this with looks of wonder. Their awe seemed to satisfy the old man, who nodded and sat back down. "So in time's greater course, the wolves were almost a new thing," Tien said. 6 times they have come, over mayhap 120 or 140 years, who can say? For as ye ken, times have softened somehow. A low rumble, a few nods. "In any case, once a generation," Tien went on. He was aware that a hostile contingent was oscillating around Overholser, Eisenhardt, and Adams. Ben Sleitman might or might not be with them, probably was. These men he would not move even if he were gifted with the tongue of an angel. Well, he could do without them, maybe, if he caught the rest. Once a generation they come, and how many children do they take? 3 dozen? 4? Cy Overholser may not have babies this time, but I do. Not 1 set of twins, but 2. Hedin and Hedda, Lyman and Leah. I love all 4, but in a month of days, 2 of them will be taken away. And when those 2 come back, they'll be ruined. Whatever spark there is that makes a complete human being, it'll be out forever." Hear him, swept through the room like a sigh. "How many of you have twins with no hair except that which grows on their heads?" Tien demanded. "Raise your hands." 6 men raised their hands. Then 8, a dozen. Every time Tien began to think they were done, another reluctant hand went up. In the end, he counted 22 hands, and of course not everyone who had children was here. He could see that Overholser was dismayed by such a large count. Diego Adams had his hand raised, and Tien was pleased to see he moved away a little bit from Overholser, Eisenhardt, and Sleitman. 3 of the manny had their hands up. Jorge Estrada, Luis Haycox, many others he knew, which was not surprising, really. He knew almost every one of these men, probably all save for a few wandering fellows working smallhold farms for short wages and hot dinners. Each time they come and take our children, they take a little more of our hearts and our souls, Tien said. "Oh, come on now, son," Eisenhardt said. "That's laying it on a bit thick." "Shut up, rancher," a voice said. It belonged to the man who had come late, he with the scar on his forehead. It was shocking in its anger and contempt. "He's got the feather. Let him speak out to the end." Eisenhardt whirled around to mark who had spoken to him so. He saw and made no reply, nor was Tien surprised. "Thank ye, Perry," Tien said evenly. "I've almost come to the end. I keep thinking of trees. You can strip the leaves of a strong tree and it will live. Cut its bark with many names and it will grow its skin over them again. You can even take from the heartwood, and it will live. But if you take of the heartwood again and again and again, there will come a time when even the strongest tree must die. I've seen it happen on my farm, and it's an ugly thing. They die from the inside out. You can see it in the leaves as they turn yellow from the trunk to the tips of the branches. And that's what the wolves are doing to this little village of ours. what they're doing to our Calla." "Hear him," cried Fede Rosario from the next farm over. "Hear him very well." Freddie had twins of his own, although they were still on the tit and so probably safe. Tian went on. "You say that if we stand and fight, they'll kill us and burn the Calla from the east border to the west." "Yes," Overholser said, "so I do say, nor am I the only one." From all around him came rumbles of agreement. "Yet each time we simply stand by with our heads lowered and our hands open while the wolves take what's dearer to us than any crop or house or barn. They scoop a little more of our heart's wood from the tree that is this village." Tian spoke strongly now, standing still with the feather raised high in one hand. "If we don't stand and fight soon, we'll be dead anyway. This is what I say, Tian Jaffords, son of Luke. If we don't stand and fight soon, we'll be ruined ourselves." Loud cries of "hear" and exuberant stomping of shore boots, even some applause. George Telford, another rancher, whispered briefly to Eisenhart and Overholser. They listened, then nodded. Telford rose. He was silver-haired, tanned, and handsome in the weather-beaten way women seemed to like. "Had your say, son?" he asked kindly, as one might ask a child if he had played enough for one afternoon and was ready for his nap. "Yeah, I reckon," Tian said. He suddenly felt dispirited. Telford wasn't a rancher on a scale with von Eisenhart, but he had a silver tongue. Tian had an idea he was going to lose this after all. "May I have the feather, then?" Tian thought of holding on to it, but what good would it do? He'd said his best, had tried. Perhaps he and Zalia should pack up the kids and go out west themselves, back towards the mids. Moon to moon before the wolves came, according to Andy. A person could get a hell of a head start on trouble in 30 days. He passed the feather. "We all appreciate young Cy Jaffords' passionate, and certainly no one doubts his courage," George Telford said. He spoke with the feather held against the left side of his chest over his heart. His eyes roved the audience, seeming to make eye contact, friendly eye contact, with each man. "But we have to think of the kiddies who'd be left as well as those who'd be taken, don't we? In fact, we have to protect all the kiddies, whether they be twins, triplets, or singletons, like Cy Jaffords' Aaron." Telfords turned to Tian now. What will you tell your children as the wolves shoot their mother, and mayhap set their grandpere on fire with one of their light sticks? What can you say to make the sound of those shrieks all right, to sweeten the smell of burning skin and burning crops? That it's souls we're saving? Or the heartwood of some make-believe tree? He paused, giving Tian a chance to reply, but Tian had no reply to make. He'd almost had them, but he'd left Telford out of his reckoning. Smooth-voiced son-of-a-bitch Telford, who was always far past the age when he needed to be concerned about the wolves calling into his doorway on their great gray horses. Telford nodded, as if Tian's silence was no more than he expected, and turned back to the benches. "When the wolves come out," he said, "they'll come with fire-hurling weapons. The light sticks, ye ken, and guns, and flying metal things. I misremember the name of those. The buzzballs, someone called. The sneeches, called someone else. Stealthies, called the third." Telford was nodding and smiling gently. "A teacher with good pupils. Whatever they are, they fly through the air seeking their targets, and when they lock on, they put forth whirling blades as sharp as razors. They can strip a man from top to toe in 5 seconds, leaving nothing around him but a circle of blood and hair. Do not doubt me, for I have seen it happen." Hear him well," the men in the benches shouted. Their eyes had grown huge and frightened. "The wolves themselves are terrible fearsome," Telford went on, moving smoothly from one campfire story to the next. "They look somewhat like men, and yet they are not men, but sometimes bigger and far more awful. And those they serve in far Thunderclap are more terrible by far. Vampires, I've heard. Men with heads of birds and animals mayhap. Broken helm, undead Ronin. Warriors of the Scarlet Eye." The men muttered. Even Tian felt a cold scamper of rats' paws up his back at the mention of the eye. "The wolves I've seen. The rest, I've been told," Telford went on. "And while I don't believe it all, I believe much. But never mind Thunderclap and what may den there. Let's stick to the wolves. The wolves are our problem, and problem enough, especially when they come around to the to the teeth. He shook his head, smiling grimly. What would we do? Perhaps we could knock them from their great horses with hoes, sighed Jaffords, do you think? Derisive laughter greeted this. We have no weapons that can stand against them, Telford said. He was now dry and businesslike, a man stating the bottom line. Even if we had such, we're farmers and ranchers and stockmen, not fighters. We... Stop that yellow talk, Telford. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Shocked gasps greeted this chilly pronouncement. There was cracking backs and creaking necks as men turned to see who had spoken. Slowly then, as if to give them exactly what they wanted, the white-haired latecomer in the long black coat and turned-around collar rose slowly from the bench at the very back of the room. The scar on his forehead, it was in the shape of a cross, was bright in the light of the kerosene lamps. It was the old fella. Telford recovered himself with relative speed, but when he spoke, Tian thought he still looked shocked. Beg pardon, Perry Callahan, but I have the feather. To hell with your heathen feather, and to hell with your cowardly counsel, Perry Callahan said. He walked down the center aisle, stepping with the grim gait of arthritis. He wasn't as old as the Manny elder, nor nearly so old as Tian's grandpère, who claimed to be the oldest person not only here, but in Calla Lockwood to the south. And yet he seemed somehow older than both, older than the ages. Some of this, no doubt, had to do with the haunted eyes that looked out of the world from below the scar on his forehead. Zalia claimed it had been self-inflicted. More had to do with the sound of him, although he had been here enough years to build his strange man-Jesus church and convert half the Calla to his way of spiritual thinking. Not even a stranger would have been fooled into believing Perry Callahan was from here. His alienness was in his flat and nasal speech, and in the often obscure slang he used. Street jive, he called it. He had undoubtedly come from one of those other worlds the Manny were always babbling about, although he never spoke of it. And Calla Bryn Sturgis was now his home. He had the sort of dry and unquestionable authority that made it difficult to dispute his right to speak, with or without the feather. Younger than Tian's grandpère he might have been, but Perry Callahan was still the old fella. Now he surveyed the men of the Calla Bryn Sturgis, not even glancing at George Telford. The feathers sagged in Telford's hand. He sat down on the first bench, still holding it. Callahan began with one of his slang terms, but they were farmers and no one needed to ask for an explanation. This is chicken shit. He surveyed them longer. Most would not return his look. After a moment, even Eisenhart and Adams dropped their eyes. Overholser kept his head up, but under the old fellow's hard gaze, the rancher looked petulant rather than defiant. Chicken shit, the man in the black coat and turned-around collar repeated, enunciating each syllable. A small gold cross gleamed below the notch in the backwards collar. On his forehead, that other cross, the one Zalia believed he'd carved in his flesh with his own thumbnail in partial penance for some awful sin, glared under the lamps like a tattoo. This young man isn't one of mine, but he's right, and I think you all know it. You know it in your hearts, even you, Mr. Overholser, and you, George Telford. No such thing, Telford said, but his voice was weak and stripped of its former persuasive charm. All your lies will cross your eyes. That's what my mother would have told you. Callahan offered Telford a thin smile. Tian would have wanted pointed in his direction, and then Callahan did turn to him. I never heard it put better than you put it tonight, boy. Thank ye, Si. Tian raised a feeble hand and managed an even more feeble smile. He felt like a character in a silly festival play, saved at the last moment by some improbable supernatural intervention. I know a bit about cowardice. May it do ya? Callahan said, turning to the men on the benches. He raised his right hand, mishappen and twisted by some old burns, looked at it fixedly, then dropped it to his side again. I have personal experience, you might say. I know how one cowardly decision leads to another, and another, and another, until it's too late to turn around, and too late to change. Mr. Telford, I assure you the tree of which young Mr. Jafford spoke is not make-believe. The Calla is in dire danger. Your souls are in danger." "Hail Mary, full of grace," said someone on the left side of the room. "The Lord is with thee. Blessed in the fruit of thy womb." Bag it," Callahan snapped. "Save it for Sunday." His eyes, blue sparks in their deep hollows, studied them. "For this night, never mind God and Mary and the man Jesus. Never mind the light sticks and the bugs of the wolves either. You must fight. You're the men of the Calla, are you not? Then act like men and stop behaving like dogs crawling on their bellies to lick the boots of a cruel master." Overholser went dark red at that and began to stand. Diego Adams grabbed his arm and spoke in his ear. For a moment, Overholser remained as he was, frozen in a kind of crouch, and then he sat back down. Adams stood up. "Sounds good, Padrone," Adams said in his heavy accent. "Sounds brave. Yet there are still a few questions, mayhap. Haycox asked one of them, how can we ranchers and farmers stand against armed killers?" "By hiring armed killers of our own," Callahan replied. There was a moment of utter, amazed silence. It was almost as if the old fellow had lapsed into another language. At last, Diego Adams said, cautiously, "I don't understand." "Of course you don't," the old fellow said. "So listen, you. Listen and gain wisdom. Not 6 days' ride northwest of us, and bound southeast along the path of the beam, come 3 gunslingers and 1 prentice." He smiled at their amusement. Then he turned to Slightman. "The prentice isn't much older than your boy Ben, but he's already as quick as a snake and as deadly as a scorpion. The others are quicker and deadlier by far. I have it from Andy, who's seen them. You want hard calibers? They're at hand. I set my watch and warrant on it." This time, Overholser made it all the way to his feet. His face burned as if with fever. His great pod of a belly trembled. "What children's goodnight story is this?" he asked. "If there ever was such men, they passed out of existence with Gilead, and Gilead has been dust in the wind for 1,000 years." There were no mutterings of support or dispute, no mutterings of any kind. The crowd was still, frozen, caught in the reverberation of that one mythic word, gunslingers. "You're wrong," Callahan said, "but we don't need to fight over it. We can go and see for ourselves. A small party will do, I think. Jafford's here, myself, and what about you, Overholser? Want to come?" "There ain't no gunslingers," Overholser roared. Behind him, George Estrada stood up. "Pere Callahan, God's grace on you. And you, Jorge. But even if there were gunslingers, how could 3 stand against 40 or 60? And not 40 or 60 normal men, but 40 or 60 wolves." "Hear him, he speaks sense," Eben Took, the storekeeper, called out. "And why would they fight for us?" Estrada continued. "We make it from year to year, but not much more. What could we offer them, beyond a few hot meals? And what man agrees to die for his dinner?" Hear him, Telford, Overholser, and Eisenhart cried in unison. Others stamped rhythmically up and down on the boards. The old fellow waited until the stomping had quit, and then said, "I have books in the rectory, 6. Although most of them knew this, the thought of books, all that paper, still provoked a general sigh of wonder. According to one of them, gunslingers were forbidden to take reward, supposedly because they descend from the line of Arthur Eld. The Eld, the Manny whispered, and several raised fists into the air with 1st and 4th fingers pointed up. Hook 'em horns, the old fellow thought. Go Texas. He managed to stifle a laugh, but not the smile that rose to his lips. "Are you speaking of hard cases who wander the land doing good deeds?" Telford asked in a gently mocking voice. "Surely you're too old for such tales, Pere." "Not hard cases," Callahan said patiently. "Gunslingers." "How can 3 men stand against the wolves, Pere?" Tien himself asked. According to Andy, one of the gunslingers was actually a woman, but Callahan saw no need to muddy the waters further, although an impish part of him wanted to just the same. That was a question for their dean, Tien. "We'll ask him. And they wouldn't just be fighting for their suppers, you know. Not at all." "What else, then?" Bucky Harvier asked. Callahan thought they would want the thing that lay beneath the floorboards of his church, and that was good. because that thing had awakened. The old fella, who had once run from a town called Jerusalem's Lot in another world, wanted to be rid of it. If he was rid of it soon, if he wasn't rid of it soon, it would kill him. Caw had come to Calla Bryn Sturgis, caw like a wind. In time, Mr. Javier, Callahan said, all in good time, Si. Meantime, a whisper had begun in the gathering hall. It slipped along the benches from mouth to mouth, a breeze of hope and fear. Gunslingers to the west, come out of Midworld. And it was true. God help them. Arthur Eld's last deadly children moving toward Calla Bryn Sturgis along the path of the beam. Caw like a wind. Time to be men, Perry Callahan told them. Beneath the scar on his forehead, his eyes burned like lamps, yet his tone was not without compassion. Time to stand up, gentlemen. Time to stand and be true. And next week we will pick up with part 1, To Dash. Thank you all for being here. That was just the prologue, so technically technically next week, we will actually be starting chapter 1. And we have brought in Father Callahan from Salem's Lot. If any of you read that story, Father Callahan is now amongst us. On that note, I don't know if I'm going to go live later today or if we're going to do that tomorrow, but it will be one of the two. And I shall see you, pretty shiny peoples, later. In the meantime, smile bunches, laugh